So YouTube decided that this video shows dead bodies or graphic violence, even though it doesn't. There are no such things, and that was a human reviewer that said that. So I really appreciate it, YouTube. Here's yet another video that I can make $0 from, so thanks. For the people that actually want to support me, please head over to patreon.com/Laowinner86. It's the only way we can actually make these videos at this point, so I really appreciate it. The Chinese government is absolutely terrified of floods. Here's why. First of all, my heart goes out to all the victims of the floods that are hitting central China at the moment, especially those in Zhengzhou and Henan province. It's truly apocalyptic. We know that there's countless people affected, despite the Chinese government claiming only 51 people have died. The only people my heart does not go out to are the people that are currently making fake videos in bodies of water pretending to be dying in the floods. Yes, there are people sending money to these parasites. Anyway, screw them. I'm sure you've seen the coverage. Many places around the world are having really bad flooding, like Germany and central China in particular. Both situations are horrific, but something that truly stood out to me was how poorly China was equipped to deal with even mild rain. You see, when I lived in China, I was shocked to see the torrents of water rushing down the streets after a very mild shower, especially when I was living in Baotou, Inner Mongolia, which is an arid city in the north. I remember standing on my balcony with my Chinese friend, and he lit a cigarette and said, "You know, you can judge the success of a country based on how well their cities drain after a rain." I remember when he said this, it kind of gave me goosebumps because it hit me like a ton of bricks that maybe all this development and Chinese skyscrapers and the focus on economic growth that I was so impressed by, that might be a cover-up for very poor infrastructure lurking underneath. That would be later confirmed when I actually traveled around the entire country and I saw the absolute state of a lot of these real estate projects that would collapse and disintegrate just after a few years of being built. It dawned on me throughout my 10 years in China that much of this shiny first impression that China gives tourists is actually a facade of wealth and success that hides a more sinister aspect of China. You know, the aspects like poor building quality and corruption and the funneling of funds from healthcare and schools. All this stuff actually leads to real world consequences, even something so minute like hospitals just not having hand soap. I know it sounds disgusting, but it's true. China is not a developed country. It just looks like one in the cities. Don't even get me started on what life looks like when you get outside of these showpiece metropolises. So anyway, all of this flooding happens and naturally videos get shared around the country, you know, through apps like WeChat, the things that Chinese people use to communicate with each other. And they show the devastation. They show the floods. They show the rainwater. They show the drowning. But instead of the government owning up to it and admitting that weather can just really be bad and the government needs to step up its efforts in prevention and stopping the devastating effects of natural disasters, instead the government claims victory prematurely and pretends like the flooding's just not that big of a deal. You can see it in the news coverage.
天盆泼大雨袭击华北多地，那您有没有发现这次各地的应对有啥不一样呢？要我说啊，这次的应对很有样，充分运用了科学手段，做到了全面而系统。暴雨到来之前，气象部门连发预报；暴雨到来之后呢，从交通路政部门到排水、消防救援等部门都是全力以赴做好保障。一些地方还及时实行了弹性上下班，把降雨对大家的影响降到了最低。这一套组合拳啊，真的很给力，因为降雨导致的意外事故也降到了最少。这套打法为应对极端天气打了个样，这才是应对灾害天气。
It's very different than the reality. After all, when the government sinks billions of dollars into a city like Zhengzhou, the one that's getting flooded, to declare it, as they call it, a sponge city, meaning that it can deal with all sorts of magnitudes of floods, they don't want the citizens questioning where all that money went, because they can look out their window and see massive floods destroying everything. All of a sudden, that propaganda of billions of dollars being sunk into the city to make it a sponge city, it doesn't make sense, does it? You see what I'm talking about here? When the tunnels flood and thousands of cars are trapped, people drowning in the metros and dams bursting and countless bodies being found, the government doesn't want to acknowledge them. No, the government tells everyone that it was only 51 people, not thousands, and then tells everyone that the government did a fantastic job and that there's nothing to worry about.
导致的意外事故也降到了最少。这套打法为应对极端天气打了个样，这才是应对灾害天气。
They certainly don't mention that the subway and tunnels could have been shut down much earlier to prevent all of this death, but the government employees didn't want to be held accountable. No, they don't tell them that. The government tells everyone that everything is under control, and when millions of people are affected in Henan, they make sure that the rest of the country just doesn't hear too much about it, lest they find out that billions of dollars are squandered and thousands of people have died because the CCP doesn't want to lose face. That's the thing. The Chinese government only cares about face. They need to make sure that people don't question its legitimacy. After all, how do you convince your populace, being one of the least free countries in the world with staggering levels of authoritarianism and surveillance, that they're justified? Your existence is not justified when you can't prevent devastation from basic disasters. And herein lies the problem. The Chinese government hates floods because natural disasters uncover the billion-dollar lies that are easy to cover up unless there's an act of God that occurs. It will go to all lengths, including using the police to harass the victims of the floods who just want answers to where their family members are. They're confused because they see thousands of people asking for their wife, their mother, their dad, their kids. But there's only 51 reported dead. And would you believe it? Because China said that only 51 people died, when people went to go to Metro Line 5 in Zhengzhou to leave flowers for the deceased, they erected barriers to cover them up just so people wouldn't see how many flowers there were for the people that died. That's the level the Chinese government stoops to. Foreign journalists show up to cover the floods, and the government mobilizes the populace with nationalism to block, surround, and harass the reporters. The CCP tells the populace that the rest of the world is trying to come to China with their cameras and make China look bad. So it's best to shut down any foreigner trying to talk about the flooding. It's more important to the Chinese government that people in the rest of the world don't see the flooding than to spread the word and potentially help the situation on the ground. You see why? Because if people see these images, if people have a conversation about why the flooding is so bad and why it looks so devastating, people start to question the man in charge. I mean, they've been going door to door to warn people not to talk to foreign journalists. People have been harassed when they do. You can see how badly they want to cover this up when none of the newspapers have front page footage of the flood. No. Instead, the front page is about toilets and propaganda in Tibet. You know, Xi Jinping wandering around the nether regions of Tibet talking about how great the CCP's efforts are in getting Tibetans out of poverty. You won't ever really know how many people died in this flood, even though it's not really a controversial or political event. I mean, look at any other country. Most places are pretty transparent about flood deaths or natural disasters. There's no reason not to be. However, to the CCP, it really is a political event. They can't look like they've failed their citizens. We could know. I mean, seriously, the tunnel that was flooded in 5 minutes had potentially thousands of cars. We could know exactly how many people died. It was a traffic jam, and it filled up past the top of the sign for the tunnel in literally 5 minutes. People aren't escaping that. The tunnel was also a smart tunnel, something that China likes to promote all the time, meaning that they have all of the footage, all of the counts of cars, all of the identifiers like license plates, and they literally have the exact statistics and ways to contact every single family affected. But guess how many people the CCP reported dead? 6. 6 people. You see, the supposed advantage of an authoritarian state, or a surveillance state like China, is that you can keep an eye on stuff like this. You can have proof of stuff like this. You can have cameras everywhere to make sure things don't happen or to prevent disaster. But guess what? The surveillance state set up by China is not for these things. It's not for the benefit of the people. It's not for crime prevention. The surveillance state is there so that they can use it for their own internal power and to cover up any sort of leak that might get out to the public. You can see how the Chinese government uses foreigners to go on state media and talk about why there are no charity efforts like in the West when there is a disaster.
Occurred. I remember seeing news on every television calling for volunteers or donations, hearing about donation centers, hotlines, and websites to aid in disaster relief. But here in China, I haven't seen a lot of calls to action like this. One of the reasons, obviously, is I'm not fluent in Chinese. But after talking with my Chinese colleagues, I gained a better understanding of how China responds to disasters. In this video, I'll share with you what I've learned about the resources the Chinese government provides.
I kid you not, they have to make up questions that people are asking to prevent any discussion about why there's no charity. Because, to be fair, China is the least charitable country in the entire world. Look at the mental gymnastics that the CCP has to use to make people feel better about the utter death and devastation. It's always about their efforts as a government, and the government can do no wrong. But there's one massive caveat that is hard to cover up. This leads me to the mandate of heaven, the CCP's ultimate worst nightmare. There's an ancient Chinese belief that an emperor of a dynasty needs to step down or be overthrown if a natural disaster happens. It's supposed to mark the end of a dynasty. The Communist Party of China is not anything but the current dynasty. Don't get fooled with all this jargon and nonsense where the CCP uses like these terms where it says, we are the new China, we stopped the dynastical era, this is our new benevolent government. No. Xi Jinping and the CCP are just the latest iteration of a Chinese dynasty. They're just using modern labels like socialism or communism to get away with it and to dupe the populace. No, Chairman Xi is just an emperor. And the thing is, the CCP keeps getting nailed over and over again that would previously be attributed to the mandate of heaven and therefore justify being overthrown. Think about it. COVID, flooding, dams, horrific typhoons, buildings collapsing left and right. All of these things would contribute to the previous idea that the emperor needs to be overthrown or to step down. Instead, the CCP uses all of these disasters to their benefit. They let just enough information out to their populace and then act the victor over it. The Chinese government not only sees its citizens just as a number, but not even that, because the numbers don't even get counted when it might make them look bad. Look at COVID. Look at the floods. The CCP told the world that COVID wasn't even human-to-human transmissible, and then convinced the WHO to tell countries not to shut down its borders, while China shut down all internal borders from Wuhan. You see a trend here? I'm baffled that people keep buying these lies that China puts out. It's truly unfair for not just China, but with the whole current ambitions of the CCP, it's unfair to the whole world. So to answer the question, why is the Chinese government so scared of floods? Well, it's quite simple. Paper empires wash away quite easily in the rain.